Okay, well, just to kick off with the first question, 82% of men in startups believe their companies spend about the right amount of time addressing diversity. Nearly half of women disagree, saying not enough time was devoted. How do you think companies can approach this issue? And maybe we'll start with you, Carl, on that one.
Yeah, I think that when we talk about the right amount of time, we need to really get into the granular details here. What are we talking about? Because we need to go back to the recruitment cycle of how are we attracting women, how are we hiring women, and how are we retaining women, and what are we doing about it? If women don't see that it is aligned and there's a gap in terms of what male entrepreneurs are doing, that definitely speaks volume to what they're doing in terms of retaining and attracting women in the business.
Okay, Stephen, what do you think?
Yeah, obviously as a founder now myself and as an entrepreneur, it's an interesting word, but we're actively recruiting at the moment, and we've just hired a very good candidate. She's a lady from Citibank, and during that whole process, for me, it was about transparency. We looked at people on their merits. It wasn't to do with male or female or anything like that. It was just purely on the merits, on the experience, and what the value add would be. And that's really how we've approached it all along. So I'd like to think that everyone is doing the same. And if they're not, then they should be. And I know there was a report that came up with statistics that talked about this and undervalued certain sectors, different classes of society. That everyone has value to add, and it has to be on merit, and that's how it should be approached.
I think it has to be on merit, but we need to also recognize that there's systematic, historical lack of privilege on one side of the gender coin. And I think we need to recognize that and need to move forward, because historically men have been more privileged in this area, in the workforce. Females make up 48% of the workforce today, but that's not always historically been true. It's been as a result of push for more human rights efforts, civil rights efforts, in addition to wars, where women had to fill in spaces where men had to go to war. So historically, men have been more privileged, and I think that you need to consider that level of privilege when you're looking at your diversity framework.
Okay, and Gavin?
So I think it needs to be quite explicit. I think you need to set out to have a gender balance, and whether that's 50-50 or 51-49 or something else. I did look at our business over the last couple of weeks, and 40% of our non-IT people are female. And if that was representative across the whole business, that would be okay, I think. However, all of our IT people are guys. And we only went out of our way to hire, explicitly to hire a lady into our IT tech group once, and we couldn't find a candidate that was interested in the job. But with lots of guys who are interested in the job, and started to understand why that might be, and that's, hopefully we get towards that today as well, because that's the solution to the existing problem that we have right now.
Mm-hmm.
Right, that might link into the next question, that experts predicted there would be a global shortage of 2 million cybersecurity professionals by 2019, and obviously this would be a big concern. How do you think the industry can attract young school leavers to a career in cybersecurity to create the supply of new people?
Happy to start with that one.
Yeah.
Obviously, people have heard of Coda Dojo, and people doing programming and whatnot. I think there's a good merit for Cybersecurity Dojo. If that doesn't exist, I tried to Google it last night before saying it today, and I couldn't find anything. So maybe you heard it here first today, that maybe we should look to do something along those lines. But for me, cybersecurity is made up of multiple aspects. There's the practical side, which is network defenses, it's setting up group policies, it's understanding networking and whatnot. Then you've got the theoretical side, which is around risk management and understanding business risks and how a business operates. If we can get to school children, but also then second level schools and whatnot, and obviously colleges, to be looking at all of these aspects on a sliding scale or an increasing scale of maturity, I think people leaving and coming into the workplace will be far better placed to be able to understand the risks to an organisation, because at the end of the day, the business has to win, and security can't be just for security's sake. So if we think along those lines and then tie it back to the technical side of it, I think that'd be a really good place. But Cybersecurity Dojo, that's the buzzword for today.
Yeah. And Gavin?
I think we have to start with the why of cybersecurity. Why would people get involved? So if we know it's a male-dominated culture at the moment, and unless something significant changes in there, it's going to continue to be the same. I think that's, you know, you can increase throughput in colleges. There's a lot of for-profit colleges offering cybersecurity courses. I think you start with a foundation in IT and then you specialise into something around cybersecurity. The new accountancy training, which is on the job, and then you go to college for 2 days a week. I think that's an option, but that's just throughput problems. It's still going to be male-dominated. I think if you go to the schools and you go to first year, second year, third year, and you go to the maths clubs, which is really where a lot of this is heading anyway, and you start talking about why you would enter cybersecurity. If you want to build a hospital, if you want to build a factory, if you want to build a new IT suite, it's going to be under threat because it makes money. Would you like to help protect the services that are going to be under threat? So not the coding and the lines, that's the how of cyber, and unless you have an ingrained interest in that, that's not going to be a chosen path. But if you start talking to people, guys and girls at a younger age, about why cybersecurity is required and why it's an important skill, I think that's maybe when we start to build a deeper understanding and maybe generate an interest for women that it doesn't currently hold.
Very good. Carl, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it has to do with two things. One is exposure, and I think you guys talked to that quite well. It's about exposing young people, men, girls, and boys to cybersecurity and the jobs in cybersecurity and what that could look like in terms of their future. The other thing from a female angle would be removing the barriers to entry. So once you have the exposure to cybersecurity, you go, okay, as a girl, you want to build a career on that. How do you then get involved? How do you then remove barriers to entry so that you're at an equal playing field?
And can you articulate some of the barriers to entry that you think?
Yeah, no, of course. So I think some of them are more explicit and some of them are more inexplicit. Some of the more explicit ones would be, for example, culture. So you might not feel comfortable as a girl pursuing a path in cybersecurity because maybe you did an internship in a cybersecurity firm and you thought, hey, this is not for me. This is not where I can see myself, and you might explicitly drop off. We see statistics for women in cybersecurity shows that a lot of women drop off mid-careers in the cybersecurity industry, whereas for men it's very low.
Oh, very good.
He gets to do karaoke now.
I'm sorry?
He gets to do karaoke with them.
Yeah, he's got a proper mic now.
Can I make a quick
Yeah, absolutely.
Explicit, implicit. My 16-year-old daughter came in to do some work in transition year for me, and some of the work we do is for Microsoft Xbox. And I asked her to write a blog on girls in gaming and what they like to do and what games they play, and is it any different from guys? And it turns out that it is. It's very different. Megan interviewed 50 people, and every one of them had been bullied. All the girls had been bullied online, and most of them had created fake guy-looking profiles to play online so that they could just get on and play. So if there's a culture at gaming level that it's not for girls, what's it like going to a computer sciences course? What's it like going into cybersecurity? And I think there's a bar problem as well. I think the bar is too high for cybersecurity. If you need thousands and hundreds of thousands of more people in it, if you're not building PCs for your friends and families from the time you're 12, it looks like they don't want you. It's not the case. Not everybody has to be the rock star.
Yeah.
There's a lot of work for a lot of people in that space, and I think the bar is too high.
Right.
And I think that sometimes it goes into our psyche, talking about the implicit side. If we think of the archetype of the archetype person in cybersecurity, the superstar, we think of a man automatically in our minds, and it's some of those implicit judgments and biases that creates a barrier for entry for women in this space, whether they decide or the industry decides for them that it's not for them.
Right.
It's interesting. In my experience, when I was doing the CISO role, there was lots of women in senior positions, both in IT and in management. So I don't know whether I've been sheltered from this to a degree. Obviously, you read about it all the time, and you see, Enterprise Ireland doing female entrepreneur programs and whatnot. So, it's obviously pervasive, not just in security, it's other aspects of everyday life, to be honest. So
I think you've definitely been maybe a bit sheltered on that, because the statistics show that men are 9 times more likely to hold C-suite positions in cybersecurity, and men are 9 times more likely to hold managerial positions in cybersecurity. And then couple that with the fact that women tend to drop off mid-career in cybersecurity, well, there is a lot of implicit and explicit judgments to be made.
I think it's probably testimony now, looking back to the companies that I was working in, that they really looked after and embraced diversity and made sure that they hired the right people to do the right job, based on merits.
Great. If someone's interested in cybersecurity, and bearing in mind what you said, Gavin, that maybe some of the female candidates haven't been doing the activities because of bullying, etc., during their when they're younger, where should people actually look to get into a career in cybersecurity?
Me?
Yeah.
Sure. I alluded to it earlier on. There's different aspects to IT security, or cyber security, or information security. Obviously, GDPR, you've got data protection now, so someone can specialise in that. Someone can look at ethical hacking and understand how to, ethically hack into systems. That then leads to, well, how the hell do you go about doing that? There's open source tools out there that one could be, learning about, understanding networking. So that's IT technical side of it. I also mentioned around risk management, which is more theoretical side of it, business risks, understanding the bottom line to business. So there's a business angle that people can take. So it really depends on where one wants to get to. From my perspective, I started off down the technical track. I used to be a developer. I used to look after databases, used to look after Unix administration systems. I got involved in audits, and it was through audits that it lended myself getting into the cybersecurity and ultimately being a CISO. And very quickly I learned as a CISO that all of those things that I had learned on that journey really came to the fore when you're trying to design an information security management system which is mindful of business risks, because the business must always win. What is the culture of the organisation that they can actually accept and be tolerant of that? But really be able to sit down with the technical folks to say, what can we achieve together based on the IT strategy, the IT security strategy, and actually implement that. So there's numerous aspects to security, and I think that's why they maybe tend to be deemed to be rock stars, because they understand everything to do with IT, but also be able to speak to business leaders, to be able to sell. I think Paul's opening 10 commandments, if I call them that, when he was doing his Irish jig earlier on. Paul Flatley, by the way. He talked about being a salesperson, and cybersecurity is sales. You do see resistance, there is friction, because there is that fear of getting in the way of the business. So if you can build a career based on all those things I just described, it'd be a really good way to go about it.
Very good. Carl?
Yeah, I think right now I went on LinkedIn just to see how many jobs there were in cybersecurity in Dublin, or I think, no, it was for Ireland. There was over 150 jobs. So there's definitely a lot of openings, and it's about having that level of exposure and doing your thinking through. There's different jobs in cybersecurity, and it's what is right for you. I think the other aspect is around your network, leverage your network, get to know people in the space, get to know what that means, get to know where your fit is. And I think that goes for any industry, to be honest with you.
No problem. Gavin?
I'm just thinking about what the guys are saying as we go along, and if you expect to create 20,000 cybersecurity experts in the next 4 years, you can't, because it's IT first and then it's specialising in security beyond that. But if the industry did want to fix itself, if it did want to deal with this gap and this problem that it's creating, training the mid-level guys to step up and bring the new guys into that lower level education piece and actually create a career path that's very clearly defined. It's like trying to create new consultants. You can't do that. You've got to bring doctors up. You've got to bring people up into that junior space and then give them the time to get the experience. It just depends on how committed the business is to creating, to finding a solution. We couldn't compete with, we were looking for new staff, new employees. We couldn't compete with the Facebooks and the Googles in Dublin. So we opened an office in Newcastle where there is a high .NET grouping of skills, and we hired phenomenal guys there. phenomenal skill sets. So we went to where the talent is, as opposed to trying to create 500 new .NET developers here in Dublin with 5 years experience. You just can't, it's impossible. So 500, 5,000, 50,000, it's an impossible number. But you can build up from that mid-level, I think. Maybe that's an idea.
Yeah. Sorry, Coral.
Oh, no, I was just going to add on to this. Like, in terms of finding solutions, there's going to be a lot more jobs. The numbers are definitely going to grow in terms of demand for cybersecurity. There is definitely headroom to be played here because 1 in 10 people in cybersecurity are women. So there's definitely ways to make sure we can bring in more women to fill those skills gaps as well. Exactly.
Good. I think that almost links into the next question, which was, there are many ways of entering into the cybersecurity industry if it's something someone was interested in. But where would be the best place to start? For instance, we start with you, Stephen, because you mentioned a lot of different sort of specialisms that you could start with.
Right, okay. Said too much, did I? No. I think for me, the fundamentals of security, obviously you just talked about IT, having a good understanding of IT core components, understanding networking, because ultimately the network reflects everything that is happening. Data is transferring, systems are connected, and ultimately, that's where you're going to see risks, unusual user behavior and whatnot. So you can fully understand how a network interconnects, how machines get on there, how data is represented on a network, encryption. I think that's a really good place to then be able to approach risk management strategies to say, where does the risk lie, based on business risk, crown jewels, material assets, where do they sit, how do they all communicate with each other. I think that would be a really good starting place because you can't dive into, being a security professional without that background. I think it's key. It takes time, it needs nurturing, there's going to be errors made, and that's just trial and error. But that's my thought in relation to it. But the other side of it, just before I hand it off to the rest of the guys, is that there's so many open source tools out there that people can avail of, like Backtrack, Kali. All these are preloaded with tools that people can use and understand how it works. You've got the social engineering toolkit, so you can actually look at how to create phishing emails, create fake web pages. There's YouTube videos where people can assess all of this. So there's lots of things that people can be doing to understand, how cyber criminals are going. And last but not least is to think like an attacker. Don't think like a good guy. Because if you think like that, you're actually going to be thinking everything's safe when, that's not the reality. So.
Great. What do you think, Cam?
I guess we talked earlier on about paid college, for-profit colleges. There's a whole industry ready to pop up there because we're not going to get them through the schools quick enough. They're just not going to scale up in that way. But I do think if we're looking to talk about the long-term solution here, it's actually to go into transition year and go in as one of the big IT outfits. And we all know them, and they can bring teams of guys and girls through their companies, show them what they do. Don't talk about cybersecurity, don't talk about it as a thing, because for lots of cultural reasons and for lots of other reasons, that's a bit of a put-off, obviously, because we don't have women walking through into that industry looking for a start in the same way we do with guys. Walking through the businesses and show them what IT is. IT is the future. It's not robotics and it's not automated cars. It's going to be everything. So do you want to be involved in shaping everything? I think that's maybe where you get more engagement from girls as well as guys.
Yeah. What do you think, Cor?
I agree with that. I think it's very evolutionary. If you show them that where the industry is today, the excitement level will be a lot lower than if you show what are the opportunities overall from an aggregate perspective. Like, where can this go and what does this mean from a technology perspective, and what can it mean for you, and what role can you play in that?
Great. And how would you go about closing the ratio between men and women in the tech sector? Carl, do you want to start that?
Oh my God. I think that there's so much to be done. So if we look at it from a macro perspective, from a societal level, there's a lot that we can do. Just even when there's a lot of studies to be done where if you have a girl versus a boy, there's a lot of implicit bias that you have when you have a girl in terms of, like, You might call her more like beautiful things, or you might have her play with fewer Legos and things like that. Just from growing up, you have less exposure, I think, to more of the technical, mathematical, scientific sides than a boy would. So the implicit bias is built in from the time that you're a toddler, or you're naturally born, to the fact that you go through grade school and then you have societal forces like acting up on you, telling you who you should be, where you fit, and what sort of archetypes in terms of your careers that you should be built into. And then we move into like this, the graduate school system where we have like cultures. And you talked about the gaming culture, for example, and some of the anecdotes that you shared. And it's how do we change that culture within our school systems, within how teachers treat girls, within our exposure to cybersecurity and just broader tech roles. I don't think it's like a one-size-fit-all solution. It's from a societal perspective to help resolve this.
Well, I mean, put it in context. I'm an employer, and you tend to find employers instinctively think they're doing a good job on that type of issue. Is there any message that you would give as a woman to employers? Like 1 or 2 tips that they could take away? Yes.
First is find more women. Don't give me the excuse of, I can't find any. Go find them. And if they're not taking the bait, they're not taking the jobs that you're putting on the table, then go back and revise your strategy. Is there something in your role spec? Maybe your hiring manager isn't interviewing a woman in the right way. Is there anything that's turning her off from coming to the office? There's just so many things. Go back and revise your strategy and find those women because they are out there. The second thing would be is look internally. Look internally into your structures and how can you promote more women up. I think that as a woman in any industry, if you see a senior level woman, you're more likely to be motivated. You're more likely to feel like, okay, I can now do this. I can now get there. It's promote more women. When you have the opportunity, promote them. I know, so I also work as an associate manager at Accenture, and at Accenture what we have is, one of the rules that we have is if a woman is ready for promotion, we will promote her, and that's the rule of trade. Even if there's a man ready for promotion, we will pick the woman, and you have to do some things like that. That's drastic.
And Gavin, what would you say about closing the ratio?
I think we spoke about being explicit, so I think you have to say we're going to have this ratio, and then aim for it. And like Carl said, we hired somebody recently for finance. Our financial controller is a lady. She's been with us 8 years, and she hired a guy to do the job because of the people she interviewed. He was the best. But we should have maybe looked longer and found a woman who was interested in the role to come into the tech space, to come into the tech environment. Vodafone do it very well. They've basically set numbers against their C-suite. They've set numbers against their management suite, and they hit them because it's a goal. It's a business objective to remove gender bias. If we pretend it's not there, well then it suits us to say, well, we'll hire the best person. But if it's been created by generations before us, and we're uncomfortable with that, and we want to change it, well then you actually have to go out and make some goals, set some goals, and try and achieve them. I don't think it's good enough for us to say, Ruth hired the best person. Had we sat down with Carl a month before that, we might have said, well, actually, let's go out of our way to hire the best female candidate. And if we don't find her early, we'll have a look at the role again. We'll keep going until we do.
Stephen?
Yeah, no, we've just actively gone through a recruitment cycle, and we've recruited a very, very experienced lady. And we're very excited about that. And if you look at the number of CVs, we got disproportionately all male, apart from 1 or 2 female. And we've recruited based on merit of the CV and the interview process and how one could conduct themselves. So whether that's by look or by design, that's how it played out. It was basically the right fit for the job, and went through the interview process like the others, and obviously was selected on that basis. But I do agree with everything that you're saying, that if we're being meaningful about this, then we have to go the extra mile. I think events like this are obviously very, very good and powerful. It's getting it out there on a big event, big stage. Could more be done? I think yes. If you look at Enterprise Ireland, I talked about that. Obviously, haven't gone through the HPSU program recently. There's a lot of female entrepreneur programs being devised, and that really is about getting the message out there. It's dispelling a few myths. It's probably demystifying it so that people can see it's actually a lot easier. There are supports out there, and maybe we as a security profession need to do a better job at actually being seen as supporting this and not just paying lip service to it. And at the same time, it's also tied to the technical side of it, that if we see not that many women in tech roles as well, given that seems to be the feeder system into security, well, then we need to look at that as well and joined up thinking in relation to that. I think, if you look at Coda Dojo, I talked about earlier on, you see a lot of young girls coding alongside boys. Are they staying the course? I'm not quite sure. I wouldn't be able to speak to the statistics on that. But with the newfound cybersecurity dojo that we've created today, well, then hopefully we're going to go a long way there now with that. So,
well, look, guys, that was very, very insightful. We don't have time for any questions, unfortunately, because it's a very tight schedule. But the guys are going to be about, so if anybody has any burning questions, you can have them at some point afterwards. Can I just ask you to join me in showing our appreciation for the panel with a round of applause? Yeah, that's it.
Thanks, Sean. Good afternoon, everybody. You're very welcome to Cyber Threat Summit, and my presentation is, as Sean introduced it, it's leveraging RegTech for cyber compliance. So I've worked in the industry. I'm just going to give you a quick introduction to myself and the company I work for, Cyber Risk International, for those of you who are not familiar. I've worked in the industry of finance for the last 16 years, specialising in standards, compliance, security, obviously, and implementing and helping organisations to implement the appropriate controls for their environments that will help them to comply with the regulations, which it's a moving ship, as we all know, any of us that work in the financial industry. So a little bit about the company I work for, who we work with, and what we do. We started out 4 years ago as a cyber security advisory firm. And our very first client was, fortunately for us, was a bank. They don't come any bigger than a bank. And we got off to a flying start. Absolutely amazing. What we do for them is different to what we do for, say, some of the smaller clients that we work with who happen to be credit unions. They might be asset management firms managing in excess of 70, 80 billion in assets. So a wide range of customers, but it's not specifically just the financials that need cybersecurity or compliance, for that matter, in regulations. It's a wide range of organisations that we work with, and we've built up our database, which includes airlines, includes retail is a big growing area for us, and also pharmaceuticals. And so the point is, what do we do for them? We deliver cybersecurity strategies. We help them to empower them to manage this big threat to their businesses, to their brands, to their operations, to their customers, in effect. And we do that in many, many ways. I'm going to demonstrate just one of those ways that we do that. And initially, to give you a bit of background, if we were to start working today with an organisation, we would tend to probably focus in on an assessment of how secure is this organisation. And what I'm going to demonstrate in this session is how we go about that. So a little bit of focus on how we came to talk today about regulatory technology itself. A couple of years ago, we realised that there was a major issue with the industry that we work in. And that issue is that there aren't enough cybersecurity experts to go around. And so we focused heavily on developing our own regulatory technology to enable more and more customers to benefit from our expertise, because there was a limit to what we could do. There's only so many organisations we could deal with in any one day, any one week, etc. We entered our cyber risk methodology last year into the Institute of Risk Management Global Awards, and we were very happy to walk away with one of those very valuable awards. That brought a different picture to us and gave us a lot more structure to say, well, we are actually on the right path. We're going to focus in on this area. We're going to develop it. We've invested very, very heavily in it. And again, earlier this year, we received another award through the Bank of Ireland Startup Awards this year, which again was another fantastic thing. So just to give you a little bit of background to the industry and where we're coming from, where we're sitting. Another important factor for us in this journey was the UK government approved us as a supplier of cyber risk and the technology that I'm going to talk to you about today. So the presentation is broken into three sections. I'm going to talk about the cybersecurity challenge that faces specifically the financial industry, but it could apply to many, many different industries. As I've said, we work in many streams. I'm going to talk to you about the guidance that the regulators are pushing down our throats, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about how we can leverage RegTech to help our businesses grow, help us comply with these regulations, and to make life a little bit easier for us. So if we firstly look at something like the Harvard Law School Forum, they've produced some fantastic stuff. If you're not familiar with them, log on, just do a Google search, log on, and you'll find out some great stuff. But what they realized was, in their reports, was that one of the major challenges we have in the industry, and specifically they're talking about the financial industry, is that the board are so far away from this thing called cybersecurity, cyber threats, cyber risk, call it whatever you want. And my experience and the experience of my colleagues and other partners that we work with would reflect that as well. There's a major issue with not getting the people that need to make the decisions understanding what the problem actually is. So if you don't understand something, how can you possibly make a decision on it? The very first thing is you have to build a picture to your boards, make it very, very clear, very, very plain, because they're not cyber people in general, in my experience. They're people that are running companies, but if you mention cyber to them, they tend to glaze over. Whereas if you mention risk, you've got their attention. And at the end of the day, what this is all about is managing risk. So apart from looking at the unfamiliarity of this subject for the board's role is extremely important in developing a cybersecurity strategy for the business. And so you have to really educate them, make them feel comfortable, bring them along the journey. And one of the things that we do in that is that we present the board with a cyber briefing, and that helps them to understand the background holistically of why this matters to them, why it affects their role. Because at the end of the day, they have to make decisions on spending on cybersecurity controls. And sometimes that's a lot of money. So it's not an easy task for them. It's not an easy decision to make. So we need to help them, and that's one of the key areas that we focus in on. But it can be especially daunting and challenging for directors because they just don't understand it. As simple as that. So if we take a look at the guidance from the regulators, G7, ECB, etc., our own local central bank of Ireland, what are they telling us we need to do in the financial industry? They're telling us that we need to raise our game. And we do. They're telling us that we need a cybersecurity strategy, holistically. That's the very first thing they're telling us that we have to have. A cybersecurity framework. And why is that? Because the purpose of a cybersecurity strategy and framework is to specify how the organization will identify, manage, and reduce cyber risks effectively and in an integrated and comprehensive manner. Makes sense, doesn't it? What else do they tell us? They talk about cyber governance. So when we talk about cybersecurity, we generally start off at board level. If we're not talking to the IT department, may introduce us into the business, but essentially we need to talk to the people that make the key decisions. Otherwise, we don't get involved. And so we're talking about cyber governance. So we're talking about the structures that organizations have in place, how they manage the threats that are coming at them, the cyber threats, the DDoS attacks, you name it. How do they go about that? It's not simple as just putting a few policies together. You have to have a governance framework together. And the board need to be involved in that from the get-go. They need to push it and drive it and communicate it to the business. And the business being the customers, the employees, the various departments within the organisation, the operations. It could be global firms we're dealing with. It could be local credit unions, as I said earlier. Some of the firms we deal with are quite small. But the governance structure is really, really important. And if we can reflect back to the opening speech Paul gave earlier, he mentioned that it really is leadership is the key here. And it's up here on the poster. The answer to cybersecurity lies in leadership. And I have to, just echo that message. And he also said that, the board's role is not like the singer in a band, perhaps. It's not just the singer that has the job of running the show. It's all the other people that are behind. And in the finance world, we have risk officers, compliance officers, head of IT. I've met many, many people here today, and they've told me what the role is. They've told me who they're working for. So it's a fantastic opportunity to meet them. But it takes a lot more than just, let's say, a CISO or a head of IT or a CIO. It takes everyone to collaborate on this. Excuse me one second. So, cyber governance, what is it all about? Essentially, there's a couple of steps to manage cyber governance and to get it right. And again, going back to the opening speech at the Cyber Threat Summit, Paul finished up his presentation with a picture of a cake. I don't know whether any of you saw it. I was going, what is he going about now? But basically what he was trying to say is, and he did say, was the message he was given was you have to bake cybersecurity into your business. You can't just buy a piece of technology and think that's it, that's the end of the story. That's not how it works. You've got to bake it in. And this slide is about the ingredients. So what we need to do is, as a financial entity, we need to evaluate the inherent cyber risk, step one. Secondly, we need to identify and assess the security programs that we operate, the cybersecurity programs, whatever you want to call that. You need to assess the maturity of those programs. You need to identify the controls. What controls do we have? So essentially what I'm talking about here is an assessment. Sometimes we call it an audit. Once you've assessed the inherent cyber risk, and that's a score, by the way, at the end of the day, you'll see it from the chart up here, then you look at the maturity of your cybersecurity program and you give that a score, and you combine both those, what are you left with? You're left with another score, which is the residual risk. Now, all risk managers understand this, what I'm talking about, when it comes to the type of risk we have, because this should really be embedded in as part of an enterprise risk solution within the firm, be it a credit union, an asset management firm, an insurance broker, an insurance company, or a bank. It has to be built in. So we've an awful lot of other challenges, apart from the board and getting it right and getting them up to speed with what's going on. We've got regulations. Absolutely. We've got our own central bank here brought out last year a guidance for IT and risk. Now, some of you might have different opinions of it, but personally, I think the business of financial was screaming out for something like this for a long, long time. The central bank had their own agenda. What I took out of it was that they were saying, look guys, this is a cross-industry guide. What we've done was we've assessed the industry and we don't like the results. It's not good enough. You need to raise your game when it comes to cybersecurity. This is a serious threat to the industry, to the economy, to the business, to each one of your financial institutions, whatever they are. It's a serious threat. And they presented a guidance, and that might have presented some solutions and some guidance towards it, but not all of the solutions. For example, what I mean by that is there were a number of standards, and being a specialist in security standards, I could see my way through all of these controls. It was broken down into four different areas, from cyber governance right the way through to incident management, etc. And I could see that all of the controls were coming from primarily one standard, but a lot of companies, when they talk to me, they say, well, why doesn't the central bank just tell us which standard? So that's a problem as well. The central bank cannot do that because of the nature of their position. But maybe one size doesn't fit all. Maybe one standard isn't the way to do it. So when you look at all these standards, ISO, ITIL, COBIT, NIST, they're all very, very different, and they're designed for different reasons. So why am I talking to you about this? What's really prevalent for us as consultants is that we had to come up with a new way of working through cybersecurity and working with customers. The traditional thought would be, let's hire a bunch of consultants if we need to prove to our customers or the central bank regulator that we are safe business to deal with and that our systems are secure. Let's get in, rope in a number of consultants. The problem with that is they'll generally, and I'm not going to pigeonhole anybody, they'll generally pick one of those standards that I mentioned, which may not be designed for your firm, may not be perfect fit for you. And they will assess you against 100% of that standard, which again is not ideal. It can be expensive, it can be time consuming, it can be very invasive. So it's not a great pleasure to go through, and I've been there myself, so I know what it's like. So a little bit of thinking outside of the box is required, and that's where RegTech and regulatory technology comes into play. So the phrase RegTech was coined by the FCA in the UK, and they are very much promoters of getting to grips with this whole area of cyber threats, cyber attacks. And so they are very much promoting the idea of using technology in the context of regulatory monitoring, reporting, and compliance benefiting the financial industry. So if any of you work in the financial industry, you can seriously benefit from this. Our version of this is called Cyber Prism. It's our own technology. So what does it do? Essentially, if we were to run any firm through a Cyber Prism assessment, it would be conducted in 2 steps. The first step would be to work out the inherent risk of the organization. Now, the inherent risk is the risk that is within the DNA of the organization. And this works for any size operations, by the way. So our very first customer on this was a credit union. Our last was one of the largest insurance companies in the world. So it works for everyone in the financial industry. We look at the organization in terms of its size, technology, the external threats, the organizational characteristics, delivery channels, mobile. In other words, how they do business, what their products are, etc. And we look at all of this prior to looking at any security controls they have in place at all. So that's step 1. And once we identify that, we move on to step 2. Step 2 is the traditional way of looking at your cybersecurity framework and how mature is it. And there's a number of areas within that. We look at things like cyber risk management and oversight. That's the board again, coming back to them, what their role is. Does the firm have a CISO? What are the roles within the firm? Is there expertise? Have they hired expertise out? We look at threat intelligence. Very, very important area to look at in working out whether you're actually a secure firm. Threat intelligence is one of the common gaps that we find when we conduct assessments. And it's really looking at the world outside of your business. Where's the next attack coming from? Has a bank been hit? Has an insurance company been hit? Are we likely to be next, etc.? Then we look at cybersecurity controls. Typical stuff like you'd expect to find in there, the technology, etc. And we go to the IT departments and we work with those guys on that. The next area we look at is the external dependencies. And again, another primary focus of the central bank cyber-themed inspections is to look at this area very, very closely. So an important one to get right. This is about your vendors, the people that you work with. Not going to mention any names because everyone's different, but your typical IT companies or your data centers, who on the outside of your organization that you do not have any control over, or very little, be it a contract maybe. And then we look at cyber incident management. How prepared are you for an attack, for a data breach? Are you going to get through it? What's your plan? And that's stage 2. And then we look at the maturity of all of those controls within those areas. So how do we make sense of it? We analyze it. Our system, regulatory technology system called Cyber Prism, analyzes it and does all the hard work for us, which is fantastic. It saves a ton of time, which means the costs are dramatically reduced, the pace at which you work is dramatically reduced, and it's just much easier. So we have a legend here which explains it very, very briefly. I'm not going to harp on about it too much, but essentially there's 2 sides to this, the 2 steps. There's the inherent risk value, which goes anywhere from 0 to 1,000. or 999. And then we have the maturity of your framework. So the DNA, or the cyber inherent risk, will actually dictate what maturity level your cybersecurity program should be at. So in some firms, in our experience, we walk in and we ask them, well, what controls have you got? Well, we've got, amazing controls here. And they go through them, and yeah, sure enough, they're amazing. But we find sometimes that they've actually spent and invested in the wrong area. They've invested too heavily on controls that they may have been talked into investing in, and they may not be the most appropriate, the most providing the firm and the management team with the biggest bang for their buck. So what this does is, regulatory technology can identify what level of control we actually need in place, scientifically. And what comes from that is fantastic reporting, dashboards within the system itself. The system is online, it's live, so you can share it, you can give access to other teams within the business. And people are screaming out for this in my experience. They're looking to take the hard work out of developing audit reports and just to make sense of the whole thing. The amount of reports I read from the financial world within the industry I'm working in, and their security reports, and they all say, they're different flavors, but all saying the same thing. The problem is it goes out of date very, very quickly. This system, the regulatory technology within a CyberPrism, produces an automated report very, very quickly, literally within minutes. So it takes a huge amount of the effort out of it. It calculates the cyber risk rating for you, which is invaluable. If you're facing your board, or you're facing, God forbid, the Central Bank of Ireland here, and you have to prove to them, well, this is how we manage cybersecurity. This is what we have in place. This does a lot of the hard work for you. In addition, we've listened very, very closely to our customers on this, and they've asked us for extra features. And we've developed a new feature within the system which enables them to share their cyber risk rating with others. What that means is they can give assurance, attestation, to their cybersecurity program without giving away trade secrets, without giving away the business continuity plans, the policies, the risk assessments itself. So it's a fantastic one. What standards? Somebody asked me earlier, what standards does it operate to? All of these. ISO 27001, COBIT, IWSA, NIST, many, many different standards. They're all included in it. So whichever standard your firm is operating to, whichever flavor you wish to operate to, it's all inclusive in it. So what are the benefits of utilizing and leveraging regulatory technology? For one, it'll bring the board into position by producing management information for them, get them on board, help them to understand what it is that the CISO needs, what resources is required to keep these threats at bay, to provide assurance to the regulators, and not just the regulators, but at the end of the day, we are in business to provide service to our customers. And our customers demand security. They expect it. So we need to provide assurance to them as much as anything else. It also helps you to identify your inherent cyber risk, which is a critical component to really baking in cybersecurity into your business. And then it helps you to select the appropriate controls, and not just any old controls that you think, or a consultant thinks, or the central bank, or somebody else thinks that you should have in place. But this is customized to your business. And at the end of the day, it automates compliance. So it takes all the painful developing of reports and time-consuming stuff out of it. And it also, I should say, is, well, at least our version of this in CyberPrism, is a centralized depository for all of the evidence that is required. So knowledge empowers you. And within a system like this, it's just technology at the end of the day. It's one of the systems that are out there. We've developed it ourselves. It's award-winning. We're very, very happy with it. Our customers are happy with it. And it's one of the things that can make your life a little bit easier if you work in compliance, you work in risk, or you work in cybersecurity, and in particular if you work in the financial service sector. But we are developing other areas along those areas. So I'll just finish up my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention. I'd invite you to look at our website, which is cyberprismfs.com. There you can say hello, contact us. You can request a demo of the regulatory technology that I've demonstrated today, and I'm happy to arrange that with you over the coming days or weeks or whatever. And you can also see a video of, broadly speaking, this presentation again, because we're going through it very quickly. So that's it. We're on LinkedIn. It's Cyber Risk International, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your show. It's a fantastic opportunity to be here. Thank you very much. Take care.
Good morning, everybody. Everybody knows me as Sid. So yes, my name is Mahmood Said, but Sid to all my friends. I'm a principal lead and security architect within BT, and I've actually been working with BT Ireland now for well over 18 months, specifically looking after Ireland customers and helping them on the journey to actually reduce their risk, increase their security, look at their architectures, and help them with the whole management of what is cyber threat management, what is cyber risk reduction, how do they utilize services to actually protect their industries, to protect their data, to protect their money at the end of the day, because that's all about protecting revenue, for organizations. What I wanted to talk about today was some of the findings that we've had within BT, working with our partnerships with companies like KPMG, but also in respect to our engagements with customers, where we've actually gone in, interviewed those customers, discussed how they manage their security, etc. And I wanted to give you some of that feedback in terms of how you can help yourselves from an operational perspective, how you can actually be far more proactive in protecting your estates, but also the fact that you've got to have reactive management in place. I think everybody knows the kind of threats that are actually occurring within the industry worldwide. Hacktivism, criminal, nation-state terrorism, they all impact us one way or another. But what I wanted to do was kind of go through some of the elements that people should be aware of today in terms of threat landscape, how things have changed, some of the operational issues that customers are facing and actually feed back to ourselves, the kind of proactive measures that you can actually put in place just to deal with the basics, and also what reactive management organizations really should be putting in place. Some of the facts around how much it's actually costing businesses globally, in Ireland as well, directly related to things like DDoS attacks, cyber attacks, insider threat attacks, and it's costing us millions in terms of revenue, in terms of operational time it actually takes to resolve issues. I mean, the average time to fix issues that people are experiencing, well over 30 days. By then, in the vast majority of cases, the horse is already bolted. Data's been taken, compromised. You're now then doing a risk management crisis. And some of the actual cost of that it is literally in the billions now, in terms of the overall impact to organizations. But what people don't realize is that some of that threat is actually, as you can see from the bottom left, employees, ex-employees. Insider threat is a huge area of gap that organizations just aren't taking as seriously as they should be. The kind of companies that have been hit, they're all household names, people like TalkTalk, Sony, etc. And recently you've also had big hits within Ireland as well, with the energy sector and with retail. Healthcare as well is a huge risk area, especially when you look at things like GDPR, people's personal data. It is actually mind-boggling how much impact cyber is actually having on spaces like Ireland, in particular over the last year, 2 years. I've got some stats here from one of the partners we talked to, which is Grant Thornton, around the types of activity they've picked up. So you've got the usual suspects there, that your viruses, etc. But what was interesting is at the bottom left of their circle there, they have DDoS attacks down as 2%. That was actually a stat from 2015, 2016. Last year, it was actually increased to over 10%. So it just means that that particular vector is actually growing enormously. And that's actually contributing to the actual damage it's having on the Irish economy. In 2015, 2016, their estimation was it was over 630 million euros. Talking to them recently, they're thinking that's actually in excess of €1 billion. So it's only growing, which means we've got to do things about it. And the headlines that you've seen in the press, with regards to the energy sector attacks, where people have experienced ransomware with Petya, with WannaCry, etc., they are only putting cyber threat higher and higher on the radar. But what is actually surprising to me is how much effort organizations are actually going to actually protect their data, protect their estates on a fundamental basis. You've got fantastic technologies like John was talking about with Darktrace, etc., which give you some really great intelligence, analytics information, what could actually be occurring in the state. But having those technologies are no good if you haven't done the basics. And when you see the volume of attacks like DDoS, last year there was over 500 gig, was probably the largest one we saw at the beginning of last year. That increased to over 800 gigabytes. And there was actually one instance where Dyn, who actually manages DNS servers over the US in particular areas, actually experienced a 1 terabit attack. One of the misconceptions about DDoS attacks is that they are volumetric only. Well, they're not. They're actually very complicated nowadays in terms of their sophistication and in terms of their packet loads. But you can actually put them into 3 areas. One being volumetric. Clearly, that's there to target you, to actually consume your internet links, consume your bandwidth, stop you doing any activity in the space. There's also TCP state exhaustion. That is actually compromising your platforms that are connected to the end of those links, overloading them. Things like your firewalls, your load balancers, your web servers. You can actually have that occur more often than you can sometimes your bandwidth actually filling up. And that's something that's growing more and more. I've seen a huge amount of attacks in terms of DNS, in terms of web servers getting compromised, data being stolen off those web servers. And the last area, which is really increasing hugely, is attacks directly against applications. So when you talk about things like your online banking or your access to your medical records, which you can get through your web portals nowadays, attacks against those environments is actually leaving them open to that data being stolen, that data being compromised. And that risk is actually only increasing with more and more companies now taking on board cloud services. So when you talk about cloud, everybody talks about things like AWS with Amazon or Azure with Microsoft. They may put some security controls there. There's quite a considerable amount of immaturity in the way organizations actually manage that security in cloud. But what a lot of companies don't realize is how much shadow cloud they're actually using. Services like Dropbox, Box, plus they may be using Salesforce, plus they may be using anything else, web-based tools, etc. The risk is no longer just an insurance to say, is my service available to the internet? Because now you've shifted your business into the cloud world. You've shifted it into a position where you're actually dependent as a company on cloud, on internet being available, on services being available. So you've got to put the right levels of protection into those environments. And on top of that, you've got the increased risks around services like email. Email massively has grown, especially in the phishing category, especially in the ransomware and the payloads that come through email. Malware itself, there's a huge increase in the amount of new malware variants out there. All of this is all contributing to a growing threat profile that is, one, very complex to manage, but also has to be managed one way or another. Okay? I'm sure people have seen the screen before, the ransomware and WannaCry. Scared an awful lot of people to death when they first saw that, thinking, what the hell do I do with this? Luckily, because of the flaw in the way it was actually written, quite a few companies that could have been hit to the point of actually going bankrupt were actually protected to some degree. But what was interesting from WannaCry is the actual amount of variance of ransomware attacks that actually came out after that. So things like Petya, GoldenEye, etc. And as you can see with that diagram I got from F-Secure, the growth of actual derivatives of ransomware has grown massively. What people are still doing is paying. What people aren't doing is actually taking measures where they're actually protecting their estates. So things like your patch management, taking backups, etc. Still fundamental flaws that people are not following in terms of simple processes that they could deal with. Some of the stats that were, publicised by organisations around, the impact of WannaCry. Officially, 400,000 plus machines were reported as being affected. Reality says that there's probably over 1 million that were actually in real terms affected, but they just weren't reported. People either dealt with them on a personal level or it didn't bother, they just refreshed the machines. However they dealt with it, but it was well over 1 million plus machines that were actually affected. 150 countries, including Ireland, was affected by WannaCry. It may not have been reported in the same scales as something like the UK, where things like the NHS was prevalent in the news, etc., but people were still affected. Mentioning the fact that the basics around patch management, well, Microsoft actually publicized that patch almost 3 months before WannaCry even hit. But simple processes around patch management on states just weren't being followed by companies. One of the interesting things that I've noticed with the retail sector is that a lot of them in their POS tools and their commercial tools are still using platforms like Windows 7 embedded. Now, up until recently, there were no real fixes for that, other than trying to lock that environment down, segregating it off. But thanks to partnerships with people like Palo Alto that we work with, they use a product called Traps, which actually can help protect that and actually can stop that payload actually occurring. But companies need to explore and invest in these technologies to get the most out of them to protect their estates, especially if they're stuck with actually having to utilize them. I think pretty much everybody is aware of the types of attacks that people can be subjected to, whether it's DDoS, ransomware, espionage, disruptive attacks, fraud, etc. What I don't see is organizations really measuring their risk management around their estates. They may have a pretty good idea of how they deal with things like operational day-to-day problems. But when you talk about instances like WannaCry, it was surprising how few organizations had proper processes in place. It was also surprising the amount of time and effort it actually took. So the more complex your environment is, the more at risk you are of not being able to resolve issues, and then the more cost it will come to. So you have to go through a proper risk assessment process, and that should be embedded into day-to-day culture. Some of the findings were, to me, quite shocking, and I still get shocked by some of the feedback I get. And these are based on interviews I've had, my team's had with customers. Denial. I actually had a $1 billion company I was talking to only a few months back who said, we're not at risk at DDoS. We're not a big name. People don't know us. We're not a Sony. We're not somebody who's high in the press markings. We don't need DDoS. Literally 3 months after I'd been to see them, they got hit. Guess what? They made a phone call and now want to look at it. There are those companies that actually go to the other extreme. They buy so many technologies that they embed in their environment, but they don't have the people with the skills, the processes, and the ability to actually manage them. And then they wonder why they're not protected. Some of those that go down those lengths have that false confidence. We're protected, we're really safe. But you can't be safe from things you don't know about. All you can do is manage risk in that space. And what you've got to be is in a position to say, okay, if we had these issues happen, what are we going to do about it? And another thing that I found quite interesting was that when you talk about hard lessons, when people do have an incident, and that incident is resolved at some point, very few people actually go to the next level to say, what's the root cause analysis? How can we improve things? How can we actually mitigate issues in these environments? And surprisingly still, when you talk about security and who's actually responsible for security within organizations, it really should come from the very top of the company. And everybody underneath that person should have responsibility for security. It doesn't matter whether they're the CIO, the CTO, the CFO. They may have a person called a CISO who may be responsible for the day-to-day regulatory management, compliance management, etc. But every single person in that organization has to have responsibility for security. And they should all be contributors in that space. And what I find time and time again, the CISO will say, well, actually, yeah, I know about that issue, but I can't get finance to pay for it because there's not enough budget for it. Or I can't get the technology guys to change their platform because they're embedded with a particular legacy version of software. got to be far more proactive in how that is managed and raise those risks right to the top of the tree. And getting some of those basics right are fundamental. So, we divide those into the 4 categories we've seen out there. What are the basics? Well, has anybody actually looked at things like standards like ISO 27001? It tells you best practice management. Does anybody follow those processes? How are they embedded? Are you able to change according to your business and also change the environment you're managing according to where your business wants to go? So if you are launching new applications, how are you assessing those applications? Is it just from the point of view of functionality, or are you looking at it from the whole estate management side of things? And it's not just about the technology, because every single bit of technology should be backed up by processes, by people, by responsibilities, and it should be married into the overall business ethic, not just saying this is a great shiny box, it does wonderful things. Okay, but does it actually work for my business? Does it support me? And what I find time and time again is people try and do things in isolation. They don't reach out to their partners, their technology partners, their business partners, their communities. Some of the strong areas you do see that kind of visibility is the financial sector, because they do talk. They do say what's actually attacking the finance industry. But there are many, many other areas that are not doing that. And there's opportunity there, I think, to massively increase that spirit. Sharing actually helps an awful lot in terms of how you can actually plan your management. Why that's so much relevance is because if you look at where people are strategically going over the next 2, 3, 5 years, cloud is going to grow massively in terms of its utilization. People are taking advantage of infrastructure as a service, software as a service. But going to cloud also means that you're increasing your risk profile as to what vectors you can be attacked to. There's also a huge growth area in things like IoT, IOE, Internet of Everything, I actually call it. It's not just Internet of Things, it's everything. The growth in terms of the technology that's actually embedded in organizations is actually huge when you talk about things that can actually talk to the internet. One company I actually spoke to said, we don't have to worry about Internet of Things. We haven't got anything particularly that we worry about that's connected, like fridges, freezers. I said, okay, well, you've got a data center. What about your fire suppression systems in a data center? What about your UPS systems that you've got connected now? And then you look at organizations where they've got SCADA environments, maybe an oil company, maybe an energy company. They're now changing those platforms to be much more IP-centric. So they're now connected to your network. They are now at risk. You could see that by the Ukraine attack that happened. You could see that by the Irish energy attack that happened. There are so many vectors now that are in play, not just your IT technology, but it's any kind of technology you're actually connecting to your environment. So, when I was referring to earlier about what can you do, what are the proactive things you should be looking at? Well, I've made a list there. I'm not going to run through every single one of them, but just to run through some key ones there. At the very top, get to know your business. It amazes me how many people don't actually understand the full extent of the business they do. Where it's actually sitting, what it's actually utilizing, who their B2B partners are, who they're actually sharing data with, etc. Get to know what technology you've implemented. Have you checked it's actually fit for purpose? Does it actually meet your needs? Does it actually give you the control and availability that you need? Frameworks are hugely important. It's almost kind of why I repeated that line twice. Because I don't see frameworks utilized extensively well in organizations. Some people may look at ISO 27001. Some people may start looking at NIST because it has some actually really good granular controls in terms of how technology should be configured. But as a baseline, people should look at things like CIS Top 20 or SANS Top 20 as people know it. It gives you a real relevant vectors of attack that people are focusing on, what are critical to their environments. And I can't understress how much time should be focused on areas like that and marry that to whatever you've got deployed within your environments. Big area of gap I see time and time again is the skills that you have within organizations, whether people are trained up with the relevant knowledge and skills. I've seen people who've been firewall administrators for 10 years. They've been told, go and deploy the latest generation boxes. And they don't have the knowledge to actually understand all the capability of those boxes, how they should be configured, how well they're being managed. Governance, having that maturity of organization, fundamental. I kind of covered some of that there. There are lots of companies out there that do things like ethical hacking, pen testing, red teaming. What I find with that is that people may do that as a tick box exercise once a year. Well, if you do an ethical hack test once a year, you've only got a point-in-time visibility. What happens when the application gets changed next month? Who's repeating that test on that application? So using ethical hacking as a testing process, pen testing as a testing process, should be embedded with change and should be revisited. A lot of companies are looking and investing in SIEM technologies, security incident event management, maybe also enhancing that with threat monitoring, where they've actually got active threat services. But the data they're collecting, very few I'm actually seeing going to the next level of actually analyzing that data, understanding that data, and measuring that against their estates. It's a huge amount of noise. A lot of companies I've seen have actually just taken that to tick a box to say, we do log retention. We've got records. If we have an incident, we can look back at it. Well, what about taking that data today and being proactive with what it's actually telling you and doing something about it? The same thing goes with reports. I see tons of reports where people have either conducted pen tests or ethical hacking tests, or have got reports from platforms like their firewalls. Very little activity occurs after that report's sent to their CISO. He may give actions to the technical guys and say, right, can you fix that vulnerability? Can you do that? They may do that on a tactical level in some instances where they've got big red risks, but that should be embedded again as part of the whole risk management cycle. And that's getting the visibility side. That does not cost huge amounts of CapEx budget to actually implement. That takes time, it takes personnel, and it takes people with the right knowledge and skills to do that. Controls that are embedded within organizations. I've seen far too many companies out there who've got policies, but they tend to be paper-based. They don't tend to be necessarily enforced. So a classic example, a company I went into not long ago, thou shalt not access sites that are to do with social media in their paper policy. Yet their URL filtering allowed them straight to Facebook, to LinkedIn, to whatever you could actually access. And I said, well, why haven't you married your policy up with your actual enforcement? Oh, we like to see what people are doing. Doesn't make sense. Patch management is another area. If you're going to do patch management, do it properly. Don't just think about your Wintel estate. Yes, Microsoft have got great technology there with WSUS, with SCCM. Windows, pretty easy to manage on a patch management basis. You just got to get on top of it. But what about your firewalls? What about your routers? What about your proxy servers? What about other things that you're running in the estate? Call management platforms. There's tons of platforms that have updates and patches that should be configured, should be looked at on a continuous basis. Talked about DDoS, so I'm not going to labor on that one, but you've got to look at having that, especially if you work in the cloud space. And then there's more subtle things that I've found where companies have invested in technologies like IPS, yet they never put it into IPS mode. They leave it in detect mode, and then they wonder why something was compromised. If you're going to put it in and you've had it there for 2 or 3 years, surely you should be moving into that IPS protection mode. Do some active blocking. Actually look at your rule basis, say, is it fit for purpose? And if you're going to change applications, that should be relooked at again and again. On firewall platforms, vast majority of next-generation firewalls have got UTM functionality. They're not just rule-based platforms. They've got malware detection built into them. They've got botnet detection built into them. They can link into other platforms like your SIEM, your alerting, etc., your logs. Very few companies I'm seeing utilizing that full extent of capability on platforms. And again, a lot of that is down to the experience and knowledge of the people that have bought them to say, how are we going to use this going forwards? A growth area I've seen massively, and we've experienced with a lot of companies out there, is they want to look at network access control. They want to know who's connecting into their environments and how they're connecting. They also want to get to that nirvana state of saying, well, I'm only going to allow authorized people. But you've got to start somewhere, and the starting point is getting visibility on what's in your estate. And when you look at things like the ransomware, endpoint is critical to environments. How are you managing your endpoint? How are you controlling your risk around that? One thing I've seen quite a big move to nowadays is moving away from point best-of-breed solutions. So traditionally, you'd go out and you look at, well, this is the best firewall, this is the best proxy server, this is the best AV. You actually, I think, get far more value now by looking at the whole ecosystem of what a vendor can potentially provide. And I think organizations should look at that, especially if they've invested heavily in particular platforms, whether it be Palo Alto, Checkpoint, look at the full ecosystem. There's a reason for that, is because a lot of these partner vendors have actually spent the time to do the integration properly, rather than having to have an API that may or may not work well with a particular platform. And, going past the proactive management and proactive protection of the estate, you've got to have reactive management in place. The reason why, you cannot plan for everything. You can't control everything in your estate. And to have reactive management means you've got to have an embedded incident management process. You've got to have business continuity plans. You've got to have vulnerability management. You've got to have crisis management, because ultimately you may be in the press, you may be in the news. And time again, I don't see these areas formalized. If you're going to do anything today, get that on board and get people working on it so that you've got a formal team that actually manages these areas. I come here as BT, working with a lot of customers here. We've got quite an extensive portfolio of services that we provide, not just in the UK or Europe. We've got a huge capability in Ireland as well. That includes consulting services, it includes managed security services, it includes security intelligence. We work with a vast majority of the key leading vendors out there, but we are not vendor-centric in terms of being stuck with one particular provider. We're agnostic in that space. And what we like to be able to do is bring our consultative capability to organizations like yourself to help you on those journeys to protect your estates. Thank you. If you've got any questions, feel free to fire away. Got 5 minutes.